So this is my DC1 server. It is the Windows 2016 with the graphical user interface, or as known as the desktop experience. I do want to log into here, so I would use Control-Delete, but in the virtual world, it's Control-Alt-Insert. It's going to bring up the password. It's our special password, and I'm logging in. This is a perfect example that administrator account is a local user account, and that allowed me to log on to that machine. When I go to create the domain, it's going to make a domain administrator account, which is a separate account. And so I'll have one to manage the domain and a separate administrator account to manage locally if I wanted to. The first thing that I need to do before I can make a domain controller or make a domain is to install a role. We want to install Active Directory domain services. So under roles and features, it brings up the wizard. And so when I log into my server, Server Manager comes up automatically, and I just come to the dashboard. Last week, we concentrated on the configure this local server. This is where we went to the computer name. We gave it a static IP address. We made sure the right time zone. We probably would have done updates and things like that. So that's what we did last week. Continuing on, going back to the dashboard, this is where I can add roles and features. So I click Add Roles and Features. It just brings up the wizard. Basically tells you, know what you're doing before you continue. And we're trained professionals, so we can go. It's a role-based or feature-based installation. It's not a remote desktop. It is something I'm working on this machine, this server. Go ahead and click Next. And right now, because I don't have a domain set up and I don't have remote management or anything, I'm only seeing my current server. So I'm on DC1, and so that's the only server that it sees. Later on, we can see of how we can add other servers to here and do things remotely as well. We'll take a look at that later on.
Can you go back a step just to see the screen?
So I only have one server to choose from, so it's DC1, and I go ahead and click Next. Yours may be named something different if you forgot to change it to DC1 when you named the computer. That's possible. That is what is actually listed. I don't think I can get to here. Oh, I can. That's what's here. That's not your virtual machine name. It's your computer name within the server. Okay, click Next. And this is where it asks you all the different roles that you could install. The one that we're interested in is not the first one. It's not a certificate service. It's the domain services, Active Directory domain services. Click the little checkbox on it. And by default, when it says, hey, when you want this role to be installed, you probably want these features installed as well, such as not only the ability to have Active Directory, but the ability to manage Active Directory. So the remote server administration tools, Active Directory module for PowerShell, and then the Active Directory Administrator Center, as well as snap-ins for the command line. So now that we're installing this, PowerShell is going to have more features to it, the command line is going to have more features to it, and I'm going to have an administrative center tool that allows me to manage this as well. So not just the service, but all the things that kind of go along with it. And so yes, you want to click Add those features. If you want to add additional roles at this point, you could. Maybe remote access or DNS or whatever. I don't recommend it. It's always best to do one role at a time so that you know it works. If also you start installing 5 roles and something goes wrong, well, what was it and how do you go back? But that's my preference. After you click Next, it brings up other features. Just like roles, it's like, well, right now, boy, this would be a great time to install Direct Play or whatever, or Internet Printing. Not suggested. Do one thing at a time, go through, make sure it works, then back it up or image it or whatever. Then you can install additional roles or features. You can see that there is something checked here, and that's because Active Directory checked those things. And so we just kind of leave those alone. Go ahead and click Next. And then we click Next again. And what we're going to choose here is to restart your destination server automatically if required. Active Directory installation does require your server to restart, and either you can do it manually or have it do it automatically. Couple things to be careful about here. If you did this in a production world, when it needed to, it's going to restart the server. May not be the best situation because people could be on it and you had no control over it. Many of these roles, you can go ahead and install the entire thing. Nothing happens until it restarts, but it's all prepped. So it's all done. Went until 6 o'clock tonight. Then go ahead after everybody's logged off, restart it, and you're you're right where you need to be. Instead of starting your project at 6 tonight, you're essentially done. You're just restarting it then. I'm going to click this checkbox to make sure that we don't miss that step. No one's logged on. We know it's a safe environment. We're just creating it, so we should be okay. So go ahead and click yes. And now we go ahead and install it. This is two-step process. The first step is just to get the service installed. The second step then is to then create the domain and make it a domain controller so we come back and configure the software later on. So now at this point, the software is actually installed, but it's not configured for anything. There is a little blue line on here. So it says additional steps are required to make this machine a domain controller. And you have this link here, promote this server to a domain controller. We're usually pretty quick at just kind of going through things, clicking next, next, next. And when we're done, it's like, okay, everything's successful. We click close. But that step was required. We didn't see it. We didn't catch it or whatever. So we just click close. It's like, well, what do you do from here? You still have a second way, we actually have multiple ways, but there's a second obvious way of dealing with that, promoting this to be a domain controller. So you just had the software installed, now we need to configure it. You can click right from there, promote to domain controller, but if you miss it, you have this big yellow exclamation mark up on top. And anytime you have a yellow or a red up here, you'll have gray up there often, but if you have yellow or red, it's probably a good idea to check it out. If I click on it, it then tells me post-deployment configuration hasn't completed. And so I do need to promote this server to a domain controller. This link is the same here as in down there. Get in the habit of doing it right during the installation. But again, we tend to be click happy of next, 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 close. And it's like, oh, how do I get there? So get up to the task, notification flag, and then I can promote this server to a domain controller. Going over to my environment, all I'm saying is that, well, let me just draw a new window. I installed Active Directory Domain Services on this computer. That's all I've done. Now I want to promote the domain controller. So I want a copy of the database. So I'll just DB. I'm going to put a copy of the database, but I don't know where I fit in this whole tree forest domain thing. And so I don't know where I fit in. And that's where we get these next prompts. The next prompts say, so kind of look over that screen over there. The one says, add a domain controller to an existing domain. So if I have an existing domain, I just want to be added to it. That's what the first option is. The second option is add a new domain to an existing forest. So if I have a forest, it's basically saying I want to make a new domain underneath here. So I'm making a new tree. The last one is I want to make a new forest. I don't have anything created yet. And in reality, I don't have anything created. So I'm starting from scratch. So I'm going to start by making a new forest. And now this is going to be your root domain name. Your root domain is the top of the tree, is top of the forest, which is the top of the tree, which is the top of your domain. So you're kind of building this 3-in-1 all together. And we're going to name this gopa.com, just for class purposes. Why do we call it Gopa? Yeah. Because we're going to use the same in the past, this is a whole historical thing. In the past, we used to teach Windows Server and Novell at the same time, and start giving the ability to compare them. And so Gordy and I would teach different classes. And so we came up with an organizational structure. You can go to the classroom server and grab this under Students class files, server administration. And here's an org chart that we came up and we used together. And so GO for Gordy and PA for Paul came up with GOPA. It used to be Gordy's actual login is Goro. And so it used to be Goropa, but that just had implications that weren't the best, so we're renaming it GOPA. So anyways, GOPA org chart. So it's a standard company, so it's just a very, very generic company. But that's the org chart we're using. So GOPA, if I go and click next, it has to go out and check to make sure there's no duplicates. You cannot have the same domain in the entire network anywhere. So it's very, very stringent about that. At the next screen, this is kind of like, again, working with Word. It's your versions. Like if you're running Word 2016, but there's still people out there that are running Word 2012, you might have to make your forest or your domain a functional level of something that's lower. This is kind of the least common denominator. If you have any 2012 servers out there in your domain or your forest, you'd have to make it a functional level for what they can handle. We're going to be having all 2016 servers, so we're able to keep it fine with our functional level for the forest and domain.
What do you mean functional level?
The next part comes up is called this DSRM, which is a directory services restore mode password. Never used it in my entire life. If we ever come to this point of needing to have it, those are like serious big issues. In class, we're never going to deal with them. So if something goes that bad, we're not going to try to do a directory service restore. We're just going to recreate everything. But we do have to have a password, so it has to be a password, and it has to be complex. So we're going to use our special password of capital PA $W0RD. So it's capital PA $W0RD. So it's our standard one. It's up on the whiteboard over there. It's in the red letters. Can always tattoo it on your forearm or something, and we use it for everything in a lot of classes. Go ahead and clicking next. It talks about DNS delegation. I'm not going to get the details of it, but we do need credentials for it. Credentials are who has the authority to do that. And right now, no credentials are provided. So if I click change, I can actually log in as administrator, and then using our special password as the account. If you notice, I'm already logging. I'm logging into the machine, not into the domain. Even though it says domain, DC1 is my computer name, so this is my local administrator account. I can't log into a domain because I don't have one yet. I haven't created it yet. Go ahead and click next. Windows just loves this NetBIOS world. NetBIOS is, I don't know, kind of an older way of broadcasting who you are. So saying if you had resources you want to share, you'd most often share it using a NetBIOS name. It comes up automatically, at least it should come up automatically, and it's just your domain name that you chose. You chose gopa.com, but it's just the name part. It's not the upper level domain or top level domain. Excuse me. Thank you. Go ahead and click next as long as that pops up. And then it comes up to your default folders. If you have a really good reason to move these somewhere, go ahead and do that. Most of the time, not. This is where the operating system suggests to put it. Put them there. This is your database folder. Remember I talked about the Active Directory database? That's what they're talking about. Log files. The sysval folder. It's a special folder that's shared between all domain controllers. It's a way of sharing things. But just leave the defaults. Potentially you might have a different folder structure, drive letters or whatever, but we do want to keep these as default. So I'm going to go ahead and click next on here. It's just reviewing your selections. This is really important. If you mess up your domain name, it's really hard to change. You basically have to delete it all and kind of like start over. You might want to just double check, make sure that's the right folders and names, but the name is the far most important part. Then go and click next. It's going to do a prerequisite check, basically saying, do you have everything that you need? Now you'll probably get several things listed in yellow. Yellow is a warning, but it's okay. So as long as you just have yellows and greens, you're okay. If you have anything red, you have to fix it. You can't continue with any major errors. When it does come past this, you can read through that. Clicking install is now the bigger part of the install. It actually seems to take longer than the actual installation of Active Directory directory services, Active Directory domain services software. Because if you think of what it's doing, it's creating all the database structure, it's creating all the initial users on the domain, it's making this whole tree forest domain thing. So it's pretty complex of what it's doing. It's also transitioning the control of this machine over from a local control over to the domain control. So it's doing lots of transactions. So I'm going to pause this and then let you kind of catch up. During the installation process, you may run into an issue with the DNS, not being able to even choose a delegation for DNS. A couple of things that people have done. One is just to cancel it and then just gone back up to the flag and say promote the server to main controller and run it again. That seemed to work for some people. Other people didn't. Another solution that worked for some is to restart the server. Restarting the server worked for a couple people, but not for other people. Still not exactly sure why you're getting that DNS issue. Oh. I'll come back to just the other alternatives to try to fix this. But if you notice, after your computer does restart, you're going to see that you're logging into GOPA administrator now, which is different than your DC1 administrator. DC1 is your local computer. You're not logging into your local computer or your local server anymore. You're now logging into the domain. And you can see it's the domain, gopa.administrator /. You're going to want to log into the domain. So let me log into the domain. Let me continue on with troubleshooting some of the DNS, not being able to even choose a delegation wizard. What's worked for other people then is to remove Active Directory. And to remove Active Directory, I'm not going to actually do it on here, but I'll show you the first couple steps. To remove a role or a feature, you have to click on Manage. You can't get to another place. It's one of those hidden ones. So if you click on Manage, I have to wait for my server to finish booting here. Okay, Manage, and then you can remove roles and features. Still starts out the wizard basically saying, be careful, do what you're doing. What server do you want to work with? It's DC1. If you notice now also, DC1 is part of the domain. Before it was just called, I'm a standalone server called DC1. I'm not a standalone server anymore. I am part of a domain, so I'm dc1.gopa.com. Next is going to be what do you want to get rid of? And at this point, this is where you'd uncheck the Active Directory domain services and then keep going, clicking next all the way through. If I did this now, it's going to start messing up my server, but you just click next. Make sure you restart. So the next couple of screens is going to also prompt you, hey, restart after you're done. After that, restart the server and reinstall Active Directory domain services. One other thing I noticed is that some people were having some issues with the actual login account. Making sure that you are spelling administrator right. It's administrator. And then our password is our special password. So administrator. I'm used to using other servers that use admin. Windows uses administrator. That's a lot to type. So once again, when I come back into my Windows server, if I do a Control-Insert, I should see that I'm on the domain now. If it doesn't say anything before it, I'm logging into the local machine. By logging into the domain, it says that the domain is there, and I'm successfully logged into it. Let me go ahead and log in. Spelling counts. Underneath the dashboard, you can see that you're working because you'll have Active Directory domain services, and it's just another server that's running on here. You can also look under configure this local server, and under workgroup, it's now changed to domain, and the domain says gopa.com, so you're set that way. The next thing we want to do is let's find the screen here. It's kind of close. Okay, so we're going to end up doing now is, so we have a domain now. It's called Gopa. We have a domain controller. And what we want to do is make a second domain controller. And there's different ways of doing this. One way of doing it is taking our second server and joining the domain. We want it to be part of the domain so it can be managed. The advantage of that is because if I'm in the domain, that means I already have a trust relationship. I trust you, you trust me, we know each other. If I'm outside the domain and I try to make it a domain controller, you have to set up all these complex configurations to make it a trust situation. And it's just not worth the time or the energy. So what we want to do is make it part of the domain. So when we go over to our domain controller 2, or DC2 server, I want to make it part of the domain. So if I do Control Alt Insert, and then I type in my password, sconfig is our friend in the command line interface. So I'm going to sconfig, and you can see I'm part of a work group called work group, and I'm going to make it part of a domain. Now, a little bit more technical side of things. Let me actually switch back to the notepad here. There is something called gopa.com. There's something out there called gopa.com, and I'm going to want to join it. So when I want to join something based on a name, it's kind of like if I want to go to eBay or CNN or whatever I want to go to, I need to translate that to an IP address. What changes names to IP addresses? What does that? DNS does that. Where's my DNS server that knows about this thing called Gopa? That would be this server right there, that DC1 server. That whole DNS issue that we're kind of having a problem with for some computers, that's what's happening there. So that is where this DC2 server is going to have to look to figure out what this whole gopa.com name resolution works with. Right now, so this is a logical network. On a physical network, this is all part of one network, and we have a router over here, which is 192.168.118.118.2. That's what that's looking to for DNS right now. It's not going to find that gopa.com. It has no idea anything about that. So we do have to make this change first. We're going to have to take this DC2 server and have it point to this DNS server instead of this DNS server. So we're going to do that underneath the network configuration. So I hit number 8 on my server over here. And I only have one network card to work with. So I'm going to hit number 1 on here. And now I'm looking at my DNS server settings. So if I hit number 2 to set my DNS servers, right now it's set to 192. Up here it says DNS is 192.168.118.2. I want to put that to my first server, which is 192.168.118. Was it 11? It should, no, I better go back and look just to make sure. .12. I don't have a secondary one, so I'm just going to hit enter for blank or none. And now my DNS is pointing to 192.168.118.12. So I should be pretty good. Now, the next step, when I go to join the domain, it should be able to resolve that name, gopa.com. If you can't join the domain, it's usually this issue. You're pointing to the wrong DNS server. Typically. There could be all kinds of other things, but that's by far the biggest issue. So to join a domain, in the regular Windows world, you go to the system configuration screen and then change the domain. But here I hit number 1. And then I hit D for domain. I want to join a domain. And it says, what domain do you want to join? And I want to join gopa.com. Okay, somebody says that you can join our club. No one can't. You can't just walk up and join our club without somebody like giving you like an okay. And the specified authorization domain and user is going to be gopa/administrator. It's very specific that it's gopa/administrator, not just administrator, because administrator is a local account. The local user does not have authority to let you join the domain. This administrator account on the Gopa domain does have the right to allow you to join. It asks you the password then. What is the password? Don't freak out. Nothing shows up on the screen. Often when you join a domain, you want to make sure that your computer name's set, because once you join the domain, it's very difficult to rename a computer. We named it properly beforehand, so no, I don't want to change the computer name. So I'm just going to go ahead and click no. You must restart your computer. Obviously, if you join a domain or change the computer name, you always have to restart. So we're going to go do that. It joins the domain, and then it says restarting. Oh, I'm going to log on to my DC2. So I'm going to do a Control-Alt-Insert. Type in password. If I go to then sconfig, just like before, I should be able to see that I'm now part of a domain. That's all I've done so far is just join the domain. I know if you're working ahead or whatever like that, I mean, we're catching up, just kind of take notes.
Okay.
So let's take a look at our DC1. If I'm under my domain controller 1, and this is just a little extra, you don't have to do this or write this in your documentation, I'm just showing you. So I'm going to log in. I'm going to see, let's see what's the best way to show you. I'll show you this way. Users and computers. Here's my domain that I created. It's called Gopa. I have a computers, which is my DC2. So I just have a computer that's joined, and then I have a domain controller called domain controller 1. And you don't have to do this. I'm just showing you that this is where you'll find it. Before break, I do want to actually get the next process started, though. If I click on all servers on the left-hand side, it doesn't just show all the servers. It shows all the servers that you have connected to. And what's really nice about this is that I can manage multiple servers from one GUI on one server. I don't have to actually be on this server to do all the things we want to do. I could install Active Directory domain services from here. I'm trying to think. I can't do it from sconfig. I have to use PowerShell or command line utilities to install Windows roles, and very complicated and cumbersome, and then do it's called a DC promo, just domain controller promo. It's another command line prompt. But I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it through a graphical user interface. So I'm going to go back to DC1. I'm going to add DC2 to here. I can do that by right-clicking on all servers and say add server, add a server. Because I'm part of the domain, it's really easy to find people. All I have to do is click Find Now, because it's going to search the entire domain, and all my computers show up down underneath here. If you're not part of the domain, so that's kind of the first analogy. So I could remotely control a server that's not part of the domain, but there's no trust relationship, and you can look online of all the stuff you have to do to make it happen. But if you join the domain, it's just there. DC1 is already part of the domain, so I'm already on the management server manager list, so I don't have to include that. It doesn't hurt if you do. It's not going to put it there twice. So I just choose DC2, hit the little arrow to move it over to the selected list, and then I click OK. And so now I have DC2. If you join the domain properly and everything looks good, you're going to end up getting something online. If it's not set up properly, and it could be a partial connection, you'll be able to see it, connect to it, but you won't be able to do anything with it. You'll have an error on here, or could not connect. This is one of those things also, though, that it takes a while to connect on occasions, so you might have to click the refresh button. Otherwise, you might just get this error that's saying, hey, I'm not connected. You really are. When I am logged in under all servers, now I can manage them and see different things that are going on. So the event viewer, the event logs, now it's on DC2. So these are the things that happen on DC2. These are the services that are on DC2. If I click back over here in DC1, then I'm seeing the events and I'm seeing the services on DC1, performance, the different roles that are installed, and so on. If I click on DC2, those what's showing here. So I'm able to manage them, and I could have 100 servers on here. So it's kind of nice to have one central location. I do want to install Active Directory domain services on this server. So there's a couple ways I can do it. I can, right click on the DC2 from here and say add role or features. So you can do it right from this all servers list. You can even go way back to the dashboard though, and you can click add roles and features from here. Right from the dashboard, and then you click through the first couple screens like you normally would. But as you can see, because I'm connected to DC2, I could just choose DC2 off the list. Either way, you end up at the same spot. So I can go to the server and add a role, or else in the dashboard I can add a role and then choose the server. In this case, I do want to do DC2, and I go ahead and click Next. And I want to do Active Directory Domain Services. It wants to add the extra features on. If you notice, I'm not sure if you caught catching this, this is a shorter list than what happened when I installed it in DC1. Why is that? I'm installing the same thing. Why is it a shorter list of features?
Because it already has the features from...
Nope, I need to install everything on DC2. There's no GUI. So there's no management tools that are going to be installed. So because there's no GUI there, I'm not going to install the management tools. So it's actually a smaller install, even though I'm installing the same service. It's because I don't have the management tools. So I'll go ahead and I click those features and I click Next. And then no additional features, so click Next. And then click Next again. And then restart the computer if necessary. Now, what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to bring up another window of VMware Workstation. I'm going to put it on the other screen. I'm going to take DC2 and move it over there. So you can actually watch my DC2 on the second screen while I install it from DC1. Go ahead and click Install. And I'm just going to exit sconfig. And so I'm just going to be at the command prompt.
What did you find here? That's what you did? You can't find any other word?
So while installing, what's on happening in DC2? What are you seeing?
Oh, okay.
Nothing. You don't see anything. So I'm installing a service on that server, and I could be standing at the console looking at it and have no idea that that's what's going on. When it is done, I get the same exact prompt. So I have the little window here that says promote the server to domain controller. If I get click happy and click close by mistake, I still have the notification bar up on top that says, oh, wait a second, you're really not done. Go ahead and do promote this server to domain controller. Now in this case, I'm not creating a new forest. I'm just going to be another domain controller, an existing domain. So I don't have to come up with the whole domain name and tree name and forest name. I'm just saying I'm joining an existing one. Who says you can do that? So that's part of the credentials. So go ahead and click change. And I'm typing in administrator, password. I still need its own recovery password, restore mode password, even though we'll never use it. We shouldn't have to worry about this since we already have a DNS enabled. Now you're saying that I'm going to be a second domain controller in the domain. That means you already have a domain controller somewhere. So we need to replicate. We need to make our both domain controllers the same. Where do you want to get that information from? We only have one, so it makes it super easy. You could choose any domain controller. Say that one of your domain controllers is, here locally, and another domain controller is in New York. I would definitely want to choose the one that's local to me. That's why you would have the choice. It needs to replicate. It needs to take all the data that's in the one Active Directory database and copy this domain controller. I'll just say anyone. Default folders again. Click Next. The prerequisite check is fine, and I click Install. If you're looking at the server again, on the left-hand side, you don't see anything, but in fact, you're making a domain controller. If you notice on the left computer, you're just sitting at the screen and then it says, oh, you're going to restart your computer. And that's because during the process of making a domain controller, you said restart if needed. It is necessary. And so it's going to do that. I am done though on DC2. On DC1, I can click Close. If I go back up to my Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers, we should see that the computer DC2 is moved out of just the generic no name, no role function of a computer to now a domain controller. So I have two domain controllers right now. If I look at, domain controller 2, I still have the command prompt just is sitting there. But the advantage I have right now is I could shut down domain controller 1, do any maintenance I want, and even though that's a non-graphical user interface system, it's still a domain controller. So people could log in all day. It has all the users' accounts and everything that's on there that need to get authenticated. So that's the process of making a server core or a non-GUI server a domain controller as well. So this is the configuration we have right now. So this is the one server, this is the second server within my domain. As I work with computers in the future and I'm looking for DNS information, these are going to be your two DNS servers. DNS1, DNS2. And it'll be able to resolve everything within GOPA. If it doesn't know what it is, GOPA then forwards it on to the other DNS forwards and things. So when we set up these virtual image clients later on, that's where we get those numbers from. It's like, well, where are these numbers? How do you get these DNS numbers from? It's because DNS is automatically installed on a domain controller because DNS and Active Directory are completely integrated. It relies so heavily on DNS that it has to be right there.